Hey friends, we just wanted to invite you to one of our favorite events of the year, Revoice. It is an incredible conference happening June 17th through 20th in Columbus, Ohio. So we wanted to share with you briefly just some of our top reasons for why we go to Revoice and why you think you might enjoy it too.
For me, my first reason for loving going to Revoice is the worship. Everyone in the room at Revoice has given up something to follow Jesus, and that creates a worship atmosphere that really is like no other that I've experienced. You almost can't even describe it with words. You just have to be there to experience it.
Second reason is definitely the breakouts. Outside of the main sessions, which always bring a lot of great speakers, the breakouts from a variety of people in the community are really incredible. The content is so rich. I've been so equipped, not just intellectually and learning about new ideas, but spiritually as a disciple of Jesus, being exposed to new ways of growing in the scriptures, new ways of applying them, new ways to walk together with Christ in community, in just all parts of the holistic discipleship. Really recommend scrolling through the breakouts that are available this year.
And our third reason, which might be actually the most important reason, is just all of the incredible people that you meet at Revoice. David, Frank, and TJ and I all met at Revoice. I've met so many lifelong friends at the conference, so many people who've ended up joining a local Revoice chapter, or people who I've gone on vacations with, or people who I've been able to reach out to when I was going through a hard time as a queer Christian. Just the people at Revoice are a clear image of God's nature, his kindness, his generosity, and they filled me with faith. So I don't really know how else we can convince you to come, but if those three reasons aren't enough, I don't know what's going to convince you.
If you are convinced, then please stop by our new Kinship table. We try to have a little new Kinship after party one of the
Oh,
evenings
yeah.
at our Airbnb because we just want to hang out with people more and get to know people. So we'd love to connect and hope to see you there.
Hope to see your Revoice.
Let me say welcome to our Kinship Lab conversation time. We are glad to have you as long as you are glad to have our in process, unfinished developmental thoughts, because that's what this time is. Good to see you both, Tyler and TJ.
Hello. Good to see you too, David Frank.
So, today, what we were talking about is the wonderful, fun topic of conversion therapy. It's a little bit timely with the recent Colorado Supreme Court case that just got closed on. Now I'm blanking on the name of it. Anybody?
Is it Childs v. Salazar?
Thank you. I was like just about to scroll back. I was like, we just had a conversation with Julia Sadusky about this a little bit ago. Um, and yes, Childs versus Salazar. So we talked about Julia Sadowski, episode 72, about the kind of conversion therapy debate, which was really interesting. The court case lost, but just saw a recording of hers, and she's still kind of hopeful that good protections can still be put in place in a way that is more clear about religious liberties and not making people kind of scared, I guess, that such laws are infringing upon their ability to practice therapy in a good way. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk through, yeah, conversion therapy, what our perspectives are, and especially this interesting concept of bisexual responsiveness. Because even this whole, yeah, I think especially in side B spaces, I'll be kind of interested in your guys' take that there are elements that I think the science shows that there can be some fluidity within sexuality, but for people who've been like harmed from side X spaces, that's like can be really triggering to even want to like bring up, and side B can be like, no, no, we're not side X. We really are trying to prove that. And so we can be sometimes hesitant to maybe talk about the ways that people who are predominantly gay might experience heterosexual desires or beginnings of desires. Uh, I don't know if that's where to start.
I think it's important to talk about fluidity, but we're speaking with Julie Sadusky recently, and I asked this question. There might be fluidity, but basically the techniques that are currently available, do they know how to produce that fluidity? And she told me no. So you are right. There might be ways of people being more fluid, having more fluids, sort of orientation, but then also people have pretty fluid sexual experiences. People might have sexual experiences of all sorts, but there's no, at least from what she told me, there's no technique that is able to produce this fluidity that is kind of well known. So I think fluidity is important to talk about. Yep, and it's important to mention that if you use like the Kinsey scale, not everyone is a Kinsey 1 or a Kinsey 6. Some people are kind of in the middle. And we talked about that with Tyler before, because I know Tyler uses the idea of bisexuality to describe himself sometimes. But yeah, fluidity is there, but I think it can be a weapon that wielded dangerously in some people's hands. So that's what I'm thinking.
Tyler, how have you interacted with the idea of conversion therapy, either in your spaces or with regards to a more just describing yourself as bisexual?
Yeah, this is a good question. I honestly think the first time that I seriously heard about conversion therapy was back when I was at Harvard in 2018. This is my first year out of college, and I was working as a campus minister. And the Christian fellowship I was working for at the time invited Jackie Hill Perry to come speak on campus. And she was falsely accused of supporting conversion therapy by a particular person who like created like a Facebook event to gather protesters to come protest our large group gathering. And I think that they got the idea that she supported conversion therapy because she was in an interview with the Christian Broadcasting Network, which is a sort of evangelical news organization. And she was sharing her testimony, and the news organization labeled the video "Former Lesbian Shares Testimony" or something like that.
Okay.
And so I think that people had the idea that because the video used the language of former lesbian, that she had undergone a process of some sort of like not experiencing same-sex attractions anymore, and then was like now married to a man and has multiple children, when I don't think that that's how she describes her experience. First of all, I know she's like clearly on the record as not supporting conversion therapy. But also, secondly, I don't think that she would say that she doesn't experience same-sex attractions anymore just because she is married and has children to somebody of the married to somebody of the opposite sex. So yeah, I do think it's a very fascinating thing to imagine that like there's probably a lot of queer people who have like trauma around people sort of mandating or enforcing some policy or some expectation for them that they would stop having same-sex attractions and experience exclusive heterosexual attractions. And stories of mixed orientation marriages where somebody maybe formerly was in a same-sex sexual relationship and pivots to an opposite sex sexual relationship, people can sort of, like queer people or people in the queer activist community or the queer community generally speaking, can look at those testimonies and assume a priori that those people are making a claim to not experience same-sex attractions anymore just by virtue of the fact that they're married to somebody of the opposite sex.
Yeah,
Go ahead, DJ.
I would say I think they make that claim because there's a history of people who, you know, they usually participate in these old ex-gay ministries or movements, and they said, oh, Like I used to do this. Now I'm married to this someone of the opposite sex, and now I never experience same-sex attraction anymore. We were watching a documentary recently. I forgot what it's called.
You know, it's just like, what was it?
Yeah, what was it? It's a documentary that has Julie Rogers, who's a former side B person, now side A person, and there's just people in that documentary. There's another one too. Anyway, there's people in these documentaries who they used to make this claim. So it's kind of like people accept, I think, a priori because they're used to this history of people saying exactly that. The problem is people, not everyone says that anymore, or maybe I ever said that. It just became a dominant way of a dominant framing. So
Yeah, it makes me think about this guy that I know who lives somewhat close to me. He's an older man. He's maybe in his 50s or 60s, but I got the chance to chat with him, and he was a part of the Exodus movement, and sort of like went to their groups for like maybe a decade or more. And he would talk about how people used to, well, number one, there was that slogan, change is possible.
yeah.
And the kinds of testimonies that people would share would be like, I was involved in the LGBTQ lifestyle, which in and of itself is a certain vision of what it means to be gay. Like, not partnered, sort of
Yeah.
rampantly sexually active, at nightclubs and bars, cruising, whatever else. And then these people would share testimonies of having gone from that environment to now I'm married and I have children, as if that like erased the entire history of like sexual interaction or even sexual desire that this person had. And then he would talk to me about like what it would mean for people to talk about progress that they were making in their groups. And he would say that people would use this vague language of, yeah, I'm experiencing freedom, but not necessarily being specific about what that means, right? Because experiencing freedom could mean I'm experiencing the ability to say no to same-sex attractions or same-sex sexual desires that I am currently still experiencing. Or it could mean I'm not experiencing the same-sex sexual desires at all.
Yeah.
And from his perspective, most people, and even from there's a couple people who used to be in charge of Exodus who reported certain statistics about how many people actually experienced any kind of real change in the sexual desires that they experienced. And from what I understand, their process didn't produce really any change in the sexual desires that people were experiencing. It just changed the way that they talked about sexual desires that they were experiencing. And so, yeah, I think he found that what was being produced there in the Exodus environment was a lot of dishonesty. This sort of need to fit within a certain narrative of what was happening with a person's sexual desires that wasn't actually accurate.
And that's the Netflix documentary that came out 2021, I think, was called Pray Away, where Julie Rogers and others shared in there, and some of them were from Exodus, even like leaders, national speakers on this, and they just had such this strong, like, it's so clear this is exactly like what I have, this new experience, all that's gone. And it's crazy to watch those interviews of them, like kind of like recordings on national TV, and then 20 plus years later, and they're like, yeah, I was just so deeply lying to myself and to everybody around me, and my world came crashing down once all of a sudden I found myself at a gay bar.
A lot of them also became side A, at least from that.
Yeah, I think it was like 80% of Exodus founders,
leaders,
became left their marriages and entered into side A partnerships. Well, I guess I don't know if all of them were Christian, but same-sex partnerships. So yeah, I think the track record is pretty terrible, but it was because I came, into this not having experienced anything aside from, just my own defaults to growing up and trying to pray away homosexual attraction. And so when starting kind of just interviewing people who I've been to a local Sidex Ministries, like they had a day seminar, went to that like a decade ago or something, little less than that. And at least at that time, I was like, oh, most of what they actually talk about here seems fine. There wasn't like a huge emphasis or clear articulation of people. Um, they weren't making these radical claims. There's nothing that I picked up about that. I think things were just under general arcs around discipleship, healing, um, yeah, mostly healing, I think, and reintegrating. And so it's interesting talk. I'm trying to. Who's the first SideX person that we talked to? Marco Casanova.
Marco. Yeah.
Yeah. So like we talked with Marco, and he's honest about still being a struggler. But his integration leading him towards uh basically, yeah, like, oh, he now can be a man to his wife and, you know, awakened that sexual desire, but still a struggler. But then we then interviewed Nate from Agape First Ministries, and he's like, I'm straight. I have, no, I go to the gym. I'm not, I don't have weird looks towards the other guys. Like, things are fine. I love my wife. Um, and Jason Thompson, I forget. Do you remember how he answered?
Jason Thompson is from Portland Fellowship,
Yeah.
and he was just more negative against side B. We talked about side B a lot. He's married and he has children.
No, Jason's single, isn't he? Oh no,
I
Jason
thought he
was
was
married.
married.
You're right. But
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of people in his ministry are still single.
yeah. And I thought he had a similar testimony that
Nate.
his sexual attractions aren't there anymore. Yeah, he feels like he's made a change from predominantly same-sex attractions to, I guess, exclusively almost opposite sex attractions.
And it's just
That's how I
so
understood him.
hard to like I both believe that there are like what I would categorize as the possibilities of rare anomalies, but like watching these documentaries like Pray Away and knowing just the sheer amount of theological social pressure that people can have to like fit themselves in a narrative, I'm like, I want to believe you that I don't want to normalize your experience, even if it's true, but I've also just seen people lie to themselves. Uh, and and then I mean, throw in the whole thing about like, okay, maybe they were Kinsey, whatever, but if they're like a more asexual person, anyways, how much of their like shift in attractions, what I don't know, how much would that like peak be notable, anyways? Like, I don't know. There's just other ways to talk about kind of what's happening in the sexual experience.
Yeah, I also think there's a thing. I think that this was happening with like there's a popular charismatic church called Bethel Church that created a social media campaign called Changed, or the Changed movement, something like that. Um, that was sort of, it almost seemed like a new version of conversion therapy or reparative therapy or something like that. I don't want to make that claim sort of concretely or something. I'm just saying that this was the vibe I got from it. But it seemed to me that what was actually happening in that movement and in many of the sort of modern reparative therapy movements is not that people are actually experiencing a difference in the sexual attractions that they have, but they are experiencing a change in how they identify. So somebody might assume, oh, I'm experiencing same sex sexual attractions. That makes me gay. But these therapists, or through talk therapy or counseling or something, people are finding themselves experiencing the same sexual attractions, but they just identify as straight. or identify as a child of God or something like that. Like they're I guess trying to create some distance between a person's self-conception and the sexual desires that they have. Which I don't really know what to do about that, other than I think that like a significant ethical issue arises when I tell people you don't have to be homosexual anymore, and people assume that what I'm saying is I don't have to experience same-sex desires anymore. But what you're actually trying to sell me is me calling myself something else, even if I have the same exact sexual desires.
Yeah, I think that's just like the huge and blatant ethical issues that really surfaced for me in the Pray Away documentary. Was just this kind of double speech that was happening. And there were times that interviewers would kind of try to press people, and then they'd like, sometimes they'd shift around it reflexively, and he'd be like, no, oh my gosh, this is what's happening, that people are, I mean, it's basically a form of lying. And they just, there's definitely some like, Mott Bailey, where they try to make this big claim, and then they're like, well, can't anybody like develop self-control or something, or like, and you're like, wait, that's not what you said. You didn't say just controlling yourself. But I think, so aside from the lying part, if people are actually explicit, maybe this is a tangent. It's kind of some of the like, this is where the side Y and side X overlap in this kind of identity piece. I know there is some, I don't know whether would fall into cognitive behavioral therapy directions, where like, you think, therefore you do in this certain way, that is a meaningful thing for some people who feel trapped in a certain kind of way of being, of unwanted behavior, and that psychological cognitive distinction to say, no, I'm not that gay, or that like gay version of me. I am instead a child of God. And like, especially like taking on biblical principles of self-identity, self-understanding, to say, oh, I'm made in the image of God. I'm meant to glorify him in my body. I've been bought with a price. I've been purchased by his blood. This defines who I am and how I live. Like that is very Christian, to re-understand ourselves in light of the gospel in order to change how we live.
Yeah, but it's not very Christian to, I think, not live in reality too, though, or to not want to understand the nuance of things. Also, conversion therapy, that's what you said, is unethical. But one of its other chief unethical things, in my opinion, was this promise that these techniques can produce a change in desire. And I think they didn't actually produce that result. And there wasn't, in my opinion, not a lot of reflection like, oh, maybe this didn't work, so maybe something else is happening, among the major thinkers of reparative or conversion therapy. So yeah, it is good people understand themselves as Christians and try to think of their lives from the lens of like the Holy Spirit, living in the Spirit. But it's bad to erase the reality, I think. But also at the same time, it relies on this prior assumption that being gay is bad. And that's a whole thing. I think side B in our movement is attempting to make it more complex, not say it's just bad. When we talk about the gifts of being queer, we're intrinsically saying there may be certain bad things, but there's also certain good things. So if being gay is not just this horrible thing, you don't have to convert away from it. You just have to understand this is a type of experience that human beings have. And what does it mean to live into this experience in a holy way? I think it's very different than saying you have to convert from gay to straight.
And I ask you guys, because one of this, like a lot of the kind of the goods of some of these ex-gay ministries, in comparison, I will say, to side Y ministries, well, they tend to not be like ministries as much as just like talking points, because they're not actually like getting into the depths of people's experiences. Whereas like X ministries, they're like building relationships and trying to help people actually like grow and work through sexual trauma or whatever. And so the practical goods that come out of it is that they are actually helping people move, especially like past sexual addiction, and kind of moving into just some general Christian discipleship around obedience to Christ, and loving Him versus loving the world. But it's really frustrating that those like basic Christian practices of discipleship and maturity get like co-opted into a certain narrative, that kind of tends towards this erasure. But and so towards that end, I think it's valuable for side B Christians to also be able to say, yeah, my like sexual desires have changed over time, in that like I used to really wrestle with like lustful thoughts when I would like see certain people, and I've like grown in this, way, and now like I see these people and I'm not like struggling with thinking about pornographic images when I see them. I'm not having these lustful thoughts. I see them as a brother in Christ or as a man made in the image of God. Would you guys like, more from your personal experience, be able to say like, oh yeah, of course I've experienced like growth and maturity uh in my general sexual like kind of desires, and so there's a shift of some sort towards health and integration, but not in the way that kind of the side X trope?
If it's okay, can I go first, Tyler? Um, for me, I would say yes, but I see this growth in chastity, or like growth in a virtue. Like our sexuality is more virtuous. I went through like a youth, I think a lot of side B people have. I went through a long period of years of praying. I never actually participated in side X gay type things, type ministries or movements. But I prayed a lot. Nothing changed. I have grown more virtuous as a sexual being, as a sexual man, but I'm not straight. And I have, if we talk about, if I get more into bisexual responsiveness later, but I think I've felt a shift, kind of a fluidity shift of my sexual desires a bit. Like if I was like a Kinsey 5.5, I'm more like a Kinsey 5 now. Um, yeah, but I did no techniques to make that happen. It just was just a shift. And I don't ever see my life moving me towards a Kinsey 1. Like, you know what I mean? So, yeah. So that's been my story.
And for those who are not familiar with the Kinsey scale, Kinsey 1 is like super heterosexual, and Kinsey 6 is super homosexual.
It goes from 0 to 6.
Thank you.
0 is exclusive. Yeah, 0 is exclusively heterosexual, and 6 is exclusively homosexual.
But I was like, wait, 3 is supposed to be in the middle, but that's not. It's in the middle because 0 is where it starts. Thank you.
Yeah. I just was thinking about like when we talk about sexual desire, or even just like homosexual attraction, queer attraction, gay attraction in general, there's just so many different things that people mean by attraction. Like for instance, like if I'm out in the street, for me, most of the people's bodies that I notice, or most of the people I notice, generally speaking, tend to be men. Although like not, not infrequently do I notice female bodies. What I'm trying to highlight is that I notice male bodies. And I don't necessarily automatically start thinking about sexual things with all these bodies. I just notice the bodies. And so I could totally see myself praying that God would take away my ability to notice other people's bodies. It seems to me that maybe there's plenty of people out there who, when they think about what it means to be gay or what it means to be homosexual, that's what they mean. Like, God, I don't want to notice these bodies. And that seems like the thing that is rarer to see change at all. Like, maybe people start noticing the bodies of women more than they were previously, or like, if we're talking about a lesbian, maybe somebody might start noticing. I guess this is like bisexual responsiveness that we were going to ultimately start talking about in this episode. But yeah, I mean, I definitely have experienced growth out of sexually imagining scenarios with people that I'm interacting with in the street or people who I notice in the street. But that doesn't mean that I'm not noticing those people. Does that make sense? So you could describe that as a kind of sexual freedom that I'm experiencing that comes as a gift of God as sanctification by the Holy Spirit. But that sanctification, in my experience, has not included not noticing male bodies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's dig into bisexual responsiveness, which so the last I guess it's actually the second kind of side X person that we interviewed, Josh, episode 41, where he has this wild, like kind of charismatic prayer healing prophecy experience that moves him from being gay to bisexual. And now he is married to a woman. Just kind of an interesting story, but I found it particularly interesting because he doesn't fit a lot of the other kind of side Y or side X boxes, um and that it just moved him to, it didn't change his same sex really desires at all. It just opened him to opposite sex desires. So would one of you want to share about, is it Paglia and bisexual
No,
responsiveness?
it's Palia.
Oh,
Camille Palia. There's is it okay if I share, Tyler? You don't feel that? There's there's been what can I say? An essay, I guess, from a particular what can I say? A blog and a media sort of firm. I'm describing it poorly. There's basically something called Cracks in Postmodernity, which is a blog,
Substack.
Substack, which is run
We'll link to it.
by, yeah, what is this guy's
Stephen
name? Do you have it
Adubato.
offhand? Yeah, and he's in some of these faith and sexuality conversational circles, and there's a particular essay that's been kind of productive or interesting in our own thought process, especially David Frank and I, as we talked about this over the last year to 2 years. And he is talking about how he thinks there's a theorist who talks about sexuality named Camille Paglia, like I said, and she has this idea of bisexual responsiveness. And this is an idea that Stephen is using as an alternative to conversion therapy discourse. And he kind of comes in an interesting way to thinking about sexuality and conversion therapy. But essentially, he's part of this critique that sexual orientation can be too essentialist, too firm, too rigid. Like people are gay, like bisexual or straight. But in fact, for a lot of people, it's more complicated. And while he seems to recognize that changing one's orientation in the ex-gay way doesn't work, it's setting up for those disappointments. He still thinks there's insights from this failed side X or conversion therapy project. And Paglia, her argument for bisexual responsiveness, which is basically if counseling can help a gay man, or I guess a gay woman as well, respond sexually to the opposite sex, it should be encouraged and applauded. Because it just is moving towards, rather than the side X argument, these techniques will make you straight, like from here to here, you're jumping from like A to B. It's just this idea that maybe some of this counseling work can just make you be more responsive in a bisexual way. So it is a shift, but it's not this promised shift from going, again, from Kinsey 6 to Kinsey 0, Kinsey 1. It's this just maybe become more bisexual, and maybe that would help you marry. And yeah, there's more to the essay which we can share, but I think that's the main argument. Yeah. And that could be we've talked about this in the idea that this could be a re-narration of what some of these counseling techniques do. Maybe with some people, when they're counseled, they work through sexual trauma, work through feelings of embarrassment, feelings of unworthiness or something. Maybe that does help people be a little bit more responsive or ready for marriage if they want that. But the issue is this promise is it's too much. This promise you'll become straight if you do these things. So yeah, it's a more humble version of thinking about what counseling can do, potentially, at least in the way Stephen is writing this essay. Anyway, that's what I got to say.
David, I think you're muted.
Oh, I was basically saying, Tyler, what were your thoughts as you read Our Good Friend on Cracks and Postmodernity and Pomo?
Yeah, I got a zillion thoughts, but I thought it was a super fascinating article. Definitely fascinating. Can I just come back super quickly to this idea of noticing? Because I think it might have some interesting overlaps with the Cracks and Modernity article. I've been thinking a ton about a kind of biblical theology of desire, and particularly trying to pay attention to Genesis chapters 2 and 3, because the tree of knowledge of good and evil is one of the good trees that God makes in Genesis chapter 2. And the scripture goes out of its way to tell you that in Genesis chapter 2, every tree that God makes in the garden, which includes the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is desirable to the eyes and good for food. Such that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference which of these trees leads to life versus which of these trees leads to death, basically just using your own eyes. Like they all are desirable to the eyes and good for food. And in fact, the scripture goes so far as to say the same thing again in Genesis chapter 3, when the serpent comes to Eve and says, you should eat from the tree, God's holding out on you, etc., etc. It repeats again that the tree is desirable to the eyes, good for food, and then it adds one thing, which is desirable to make one wise, for Eve. But this fits within this biblical paradigm of see, want, take, that like when human beings are making a decision about what's good for them over what God has said is good for them, it's that they see something that is objectively beautiful, I think even beautiful from God's perspective. They experience desire for that thing, but then contra to obeying God's command, they take the thing anyway. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because it seems to me that when somebody notices the objective beauty of another human being, and they experience themselves noticing or aroused by that other human being, that presents like a very different vision of like, okay, I'm seeing something that God sees about this person, which is I'm actually noticing beauty that this other person has. And I think for a lot of side X people, what the expectation is like, you should not notice the beauty of other men. Like that, it is not like, because you are male, you should not notice the beauty of other men. Men were created to notice the beauty of women, not the beauty of other men. And I think that side B offers a different understanding of things, which is that just because God has forbidden a thing doesn't mean that I'm not going to notice the beauty of the thing, because it's actually the beauty of the thing that makes it tempting, right? And so this idea of like being like that sanctification requires that I be looking at the world in such a way that I'm not tempted by a thing which is beautiful or something like that. That seems like it doesn't quite work for me. And so I think that as I think about bisexual responsiveness, it's there is this interesting proposal that maybe what ought to be happening is that people ought not to be feeling anxious, or there shouldn't be like social shame or something associated with people noticing beauty. Even on a gendered axis, right? Like, again, many side X people seem to argue that because you are a male, there are certain kinds of beauty that are shameful for you to notice. Um, and it seems like Camille Paglia was saying that the world seems to be worse under that framework. Like things just are. Yeah, maybe there's. I guess Camille Paglia, and I don't necessarily know if I agree with this, but Camille Paglia seems to be saying there's a kind of immaturity when you are not able to notice the beauty of another, the beauty of the opposite sex as a same-sex attracted person, for instance, and that the vice versa could be said for a straight person who is not noticing the beauty of people of the same sex. So yeah, I had a bunch of other thoughts in relation to how Camille, or how the person who wrote this article is conceiving of like same-sex friendships or like same-sex romantic friendships, but I'll stop there because I feel like I've said a lot, and we might come to that shortly.
Yeah, hold on to those. I think it's worth just noting that Camille, I don't believe she's coming from maybe any specific faith tradition. Not
She's an
a
atheist,
she's
so
an
she comes
atheist.
from that tradition. Yeah.
And so she, in general, is both noting things, using different frameworks to think about it, encourages a general kind of like sexual permissivity and exploration. But what's unique about her is that she's also pushing against gay activists who would shame gay people for wanting children from a heterosexual marriage and
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and saying, hey, if they want to do something that helps them like move into something they want, like, cool, go for it. But if straight people want to like experiment a little bit and that doesn't make them gay, they just might be noticing some beauty or get a little curiosity, but
Mm-hmm.
they're basic, a partner here or there doesn't make you not straight. Um, so it's just she's kind of breaking down some of these like rigid categories we have, and trying to lean into whether it's the fluidity or the grayness or the openness that people might have in uh I guess, yeah, responding to beauty, to desire. Um, but of course she's not integrating in well, she doesn't integrate in like obviously what Jesus is calling his disciples to, but
No.
she does where was it? She mentions um something about like there is this cosmic power of like kind of creation that heterosexuals are living into, and that gay desire is like waging war against. Um,
That's something I didn't quite like, but it's interesting. I mean, I like the fact that um she comments that not everyone has a stomach for daily war with nature, implying that gay love is always a daily war with nature, which I actually don't think that, but I do think that heterosexual sexual love is moving with the arc of creation.
it,
So
yeah,
yeah, also
I mean, the way I would agree with it is just in terms of
mhm,
natural theology, of like what sexual activity is geared towards.
sure, but
But in your
that's
desire to
same-sex
expand,
love is not all that. Yeah.
exactly, which maybe gets us
Al-
into the realm of friendship. But go ahead, TJ. I keep interrupting you.
Also, she relies on this idea that gay people had some sort of developmental error in their history in order to produce
Does she
this.
assume it, or is she just
She
keeping
assumes
that
it.
door open?
So she assumes it. I think in the she
Okay,
says
so
it's
she's pretty
worthwhile for gays
Freudian
to
in that.
retrace, yeah, to retrace their developmental steps, and if possible, to investigate and resolve the burden of hate love. They still care for the opposite sex parents. So she's coming. Let's be clear. She's coming from a certain tradition of assumptions of what's happening with queer people or gay people, which I don't know if I agree with that, but I, she as David Franks mentioned, she's not pursuing a Christian sexual ethic in her work. You know, this interpreter Stephen is a Christian, so he's interpreting her in Christian ways. But I like that she's trying to. She makes it more expansive and less rigid. Like she says, she's kind of like, yeah, things are more. They can be more expansive, give people more possibilities to figure these things out. Less of just saying, like, oh, you're just homosexual, you must do this, or like, oh, you can never. People have sexual experiences sometimes. That means you're gay or you're straight or something. Yeah. That's one of the things I appreciated. I was going to say, Stephen also brought up this point that you were talking about, Tyler, that it's important to recognize that the Kinsey scale focuses on sexual attractions, but it doesn't talk about like sexual and romantic, but it doesn't talk about aesthetic attraction, maybe spiritual attraction, or maybe like friendship attraction. We collapse a lot in the category of sexual orientation, even though there's distinguishable aspects to being queer or being homosexual or being gay.
Yeah, it may be interesting to note that maybe it seems like Camille Paglia is trying to note this desire for rigid categories around sexuality. And she wants to disrupt those rigid categories. But maybe one of the reasons that I'm kind of drawing on Michel Foucault here a little bit. Maybe one of the reasons that the rigid categories exist is because of the desire in the late 1800s to sort of be able to medicalize sexual desire, right? To develop a kind of clear scientific taxonomy of like homosexuals and heterosexuals and whatever other sense of sexual deviancy might have existed at the time, but to be able to put them in these clear categories with clear symptoms of each category so that if you were dealing with these particular vices or these particular psychological desires, you could go to a psychologist who would be able to diagnose you and then provide a solution to what you were experiencing.
Yeah.
I see her sort of trying to disrupt that project, I suppose, but also to highlight that like many of the people who were put in those categories, particularly homosexual people or like gay people, sort of find themselves wanting to hold on to that label. And a way that they police that label or police that sense of identity of being a homosexual is that if there is a homosexual person who is having sex with people of the opposite sex, that somehow threatens the integrity of being known as a homosexual and then fighting for the rights of the homosexual, politically speaking. So it's like, I can't make the case that it should be legal for homosexuals to have sex with one another because it's unfair if heterosexuals are able to have sex with each other and homosexuals are just kind of like cordoned off from sexual expression. I can't make that case as clearly if there are people in the homosexual category who are having sex with people of the opposite sex.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's this interesting dilemma of like wanting to maintain certain boundaries so that the moral case for certain sexual freedoms is clearer or more legible to like the broader society in which I'm engaged in a kind of political activism.
I think that's really helpful. I think this categorization talking about the 1800s, like a la Michel Foucault, as you're referencing, is totally like in the background of all of the contemporary conversation. This need to make these categories like you're homosexual, and then you're deviant or medicalized, and what we do with that. So, yeah.
Although I will note quickly, just that I feel like there's a greater incidence of people identifying as queer in modern culture, and I think that people tend to identify as queer because they are deliberately trying to avoid these more rigid categories. Like you could totally see someone who like is predominantly attracted to people of the opposite sex, or sorry, somebody who's predominantly attracted to people of the same sex, who every now and again like finds themselves having sex with a woman.
Yeah.
And people would be like, "But I thought you were gay," and they'd say, "Well, I actually identify as queer because like I don't know who I'm going to fall in love with, or I don't know who I'm going to like experience myself sexually attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like more definitely among Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
people are much more fluid in the way that they identify
Yeah.
in terms of their sexual attractions. And I feel like the incidence of the use of the word queer is just way more. Like queer sort of means I'm not normal, but I also wouldn't say I neatly fit into the categories of
Mm-hmm.
lesbian, bisexual, gay, so on and so forth.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I just like scanning through. You guys should all read this Substack just because it's full of so many different quotes from a wide variety of sources, and it's got including he quotes James Franco, the actor and film director, and he just has this funny quote. He's like, "Well, I like to think that I'm gay in my art and straight in my life." Though I'm also gay in my life, just up to the point of intercourse. Then you could say I'm straight. So I guess it
Mm-hmm.
depends on how you define gay, and, and it goes on. But uh, I think, yeah, there's a lot of also dialogue just around like different cultures' expectations around intimacy and affection, even like Dorothy Day's kind of infatuation with certain women, but how it led her to kind of like seeing this one beautiful girl in her class as like the embodiment of holy wisdom. Uh, and the kind of, I don't know, the, I do feel like the, what makes me feel most sad about, I guess, like conversion therapy type of environments, is that deep male friendships are either something to be like, or same-sex relationships, speaking here as a male, are either something that you're supposed to be like scared of because they could lead to temptation, or they're a means to the end of healing. Like, oh, you didn't get these brotherly bonds, and you need these to feel secure in your masculinity so that you can then like be freed from your temptations, maybe be opened up to then heterosexual desire. Um, and that implies at least that latter one, some implicit um, goodness that's present in them, like a certain necessity that's needed for that bonding. Um, but I think it misses. I feel like side B has just a really rich culture of friendship. Tyler, I'm curious what your specific thoughts around all the different friendship threads he kind of pulls up in this article.
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit because I was once in a evangelical organization's trainings on sexuality, and they were citing Joseph Nicolosi, who made, and Joseph Nicolosi is
He's like the founder
like a
of a
progenitor of reparative therapy.
reparative therapy. Yep, a form of conversion
Yeah,
therapy.
his organization is called NARTH, I think. So it's National Association of Reparative Therapy
Yep.
of Homosexuality, something like
Yeah,
that.
and his just
Um,
FYI listeners, his son is still practicing, but he just renamed it as reintegration therapy. But you can find a video of Julia Sadowski showing how it's really not that different.
so in this evangelical organization's training on sexuality, they made the claim that Joseph Nicolosi noticed that gay people, what was it? He was saying something like gay people tended to treat their friends different than they treated sort of casual sexual partners. And for some reason, that made Joseph Nicolosi think, oh, well, if maybe people had a healthy way of attaching to other males. And by the way, to be super clear, I'm aware that a lot of the ways that I'm going to talk about homosexuality are super from the male perspective, from the like gay perspective. And so I'd love to have like a lesbian co-host or something kind of chime in how things might work from the female perspective. But the argument that was being made was that if men are able to see themselves as men and form deep, intimate relationships with other men, then their sexual desires for other men would decrease. And what was weird about this was Joseph Nicolosi was like interviewing people who had same-sex sexual partners and strong same-sex friendships. And so I was like, well, if these people are having sexual partners and they also have strong same-sex friendships, how could strong same-sex friendships cause like less sexual desire for people of the same sex? So this is just something I've never understood, like as a kind of theme inside X literature or like side X thought, is like somehow having strong friendships with people of the same sex lessens your desire for
Well,
same-sex sexual activity.
yeah, so here I've been semi-sympathetic, but that's mostly because I'm always like semi-sympathetic to anything I hear and I try to interpret it charitably. So my charitable kind of understanding of that kind of point that they were making for me was in the frame of reference of what I do think is true for a lot of people, especially guys, is a complete just dearth of intimacy in their life. And when people are experiencing such a vacuum, they will be quick to fall into, illicit relationships, sexual addiction, one night stands, because there's just so much void they're trying to fill. And so, in that sense, I do think having healthy relationships, because we're meant to be relational, does help to fill that vacuum with what it's intended to be filled with. And so I think it takes the edge off of it. But I think your point is spot on as well. Of like, it doesn't obliterate it. It just moves. You'd be a healthier person, but it doesn't actually take away the general desire.
Wait, I have maybe a counterpoint. You can tell me if I don't. In my experience, when I've had really close other men in my life, like living in the same household, for example, it usually has been helpful for me in regards to chastity, chaste living. And I think that is because I can direct some of my eros towards them in a good way. It doesn't mean that I don't have temptation sometimes. It doesn't mean that I am straight, but it has been helpful for me to be more chaste and have some of that like energy go well. And again, it may not be the same for every type of person, but I think that has been how I understand what's been happened in my life.
Yeah. I also, sorry, I don't know if you want to respond to that, David Frank. Okay, I was just thinking, even, yeah, even so, I still think that like there is a choice that's required in my relationships with other men to define intimacy in our relationships, or like to define love for each other in our relationships as not seeking sexual behavior with each other. Like, it doesn't seem to me that just growing in intimacy with people of the same sex necessitates that I experience less sexual attraction for that person. It's it Yeah, it doesn't just happen by osmosis. There is a sort of decision that I have to set my mind on, that I am choosing to live by a framework of friendship that says that actually, to maximize my love for this other person in this relationship, I have to honor their body and honor the spirit of God in their body by not seeking sexual relationship with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, just to note that it seems that Nicolosi and much of reparative therapy or conversion therapy has this assumption that if you grow in intimacy with somebody, you will sort of naturally experience less sexual desire.
Yeah, they're kind of operating
And
in like
that's just,
still kind of this medical way of like you can cure it with this correct application of this, rather how the thing that you're noting, and I think which I think is a nice addition to what TJ was saying, it is just, I don't know, I think of our neural networks, our behavior patterns as these, you know, the ruts or the flows of water, and the more that sometimes like water can be like, oh, which channel should I go? Which channel should I run through? And you're like, actually, let's not run into that channel. I don't think that is a good channel to let that water flow. And the more you continually guide it, those grooves become deeper, those river pathways, whatever metaphor you want to use, the ruts in the road, it becomes easier through repetition to default towards like, oh, I have this intimacy with this person, and it's been so many years or so many intimate interactions that it's really easy now for me to continue to bond with them in non-sexual ways. And so it begins to feel more automatic. But it definitely, I think, requires that intentional formation, especially either earlier on in people's lives, or where in relationships where there's a strong pull of like, oh, this could be sexual. Because with straight friends, it is kind of, that mental work is kind of being done where that's already an assumption held in the relationship. And so it's easier then as the non-straight person can kind of pick up the assumption from their straight friend and live into that easier, even if there is attraction. But if it seems like it's a both possibility, then both ends need to reinforce whatever their approach to the relationship is.
Yeah, I don't have a super clear thought line on this yet, but it does feel like this is one of the things that side X misses is, or at least maybe I won't frame it as a critique of side X. I'll just say it as like a benefit of side B, is that like I feel like side B has this paradigm, or at least I feel like I discovered it in side B, of like same-sex love is real. Same-sex love, particularly non-sexual love, can be holy. And as a matter of fact, like you can have a relationship of chaste, holy love between two people of the same sex that sexual interaction would violate. That actually, like, if you want to maximize your love for someone of the same sex, if you really want to give and pour out of oneself and will the good of the other, that like a way to do that is to choose to not have sex with somebody that you have an intimate relationship with, which really like transforms a vision of sexuality, that like, oh, I could actually express a desire for closeness or connection or union with another person by making a decision to not unite my body to them. And that in and of itself can be an expression of eros, or that can be an expression of like holy love for another person. And there's something about like just sort of thinking about, yeah, there's something about the way that side X thinks about same-sex relationships, either as like a means to an end or something else, that misses that, no, I actually can, out of love, out of a like weird love, even like a queer love or something for my friends of the same sex, decide not to have sex with them. And that would be like a greater expression of love for them than to have sex with them.
Yeah, I think that seems right. At least it's a good analysis of what I think a vision of what love, same-sex love, is inside B right now.
Yeah, I think that is a perfect place to end our kinship lab. And unless you guys, well, I'll offer, are there any last points in our kind of laboratory conversation on conversion therapy that you wanted to get off your chest before we close down?
Can I say something? But
We could maybe
go. Go.
Okay, just quickly, we could maybe come back to this conversation, or like to this article again, in the context of celibate partnerships.
Yeah.
But there's a quote in here about Brideshead Revisited, which is a movie I saw maybe like a month or two ago. Very interesting movie, super interesting book as well. But the quote is about like um, romantic friendships being a kind of developmental stage to something more mature, which maybe is like heterosexual relationship or something like that.
Mhm.
And there's a character in the book named Sebastian who's gay, who uh, is sort of unable to move out of romantic friendship into heterosexual relationship, and that vision of romantic friendship is something that I contest. Um, and I would love to
Same.
hear like TJ's. Okay, great. Okay. I would love to, but I would just love for us to like reflect out loud on that vision and like
Yeah.
how would we articulate to other people that maybe romantic friendship isn't uh, an arrested development,
Mm-hmm.
but instead
Mm-hmm.
might itself be a sort of fully formed, mature, holy kind of love potentially.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's sort of the missing the loose thread that we haven't engaged in this thing from this document. I would say about conversion therapy, I think if in the past conversion therapists or site we call side X now, if they would have just said, we can't promise orientation change from gay to straight, we can maybe help you be more bisexual-ish. If that was what would have happened in the past, I think that would have changed been very our reality would be quite different right now.
Yeah.
Like the conversation would be very different. So that it always makes remind me that whenever you have a movement or you're like producing a social project or a project, you have to be humble. You have to have like data. You have to think carefully, like what data do we have or evidence do we have to support our claims? Yeah, how are we thinking about this, working through it? So that's a final thought I wanted to share that I think about when we talk about conversion therapy often.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't think I have anything to add aside from I really liked the Dorothy Day reflections, and I think start to give a different. I think would be interesting to throw into that conversation on like romantic friendships,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that yeah, there's that sense of fire in one's heart for another. It doesn't just have to lead to sexual intimacy, um, and can lead to actual like virtues and yeah, other good things. Well, sweet. Good to spend this time with you guys and listeners. Please join on Substack and both read the original article and share us your thoughts. We'd love to hear them, and maybe they'll help us think about. There'll be some good quotes for us to build some future episodes off of. Okay, adios.